We're looking today at a Scrooge who not only portrayed the famous miser, but also set the standard for decades of film depictions of another famous Victorian character, Sherlock Holmes. It's Basil Rathbone in... Really? Gloves are back again. How am I supposed to eat my gruel in gloves? Born in 1892 in Johannesburg, Transvaal, South Africa, Philip St. John Basil Rathbone was the child of violinist Anna Barbara George and her husband, mining engineer Edgar Philip Rathbone of the Liverpool Rathbones. Don't mix them up with any other Rathbones you might know. The Liverpool Rathbones have a long and storied heritage, including William Rathbone V, a noted Victorian philanthropist, and Basil's distant cousin, Brevet Colonel Henry Rathbone, who was present in Ford's Theater on the night Abraham Lincoln was shot, and who was seriously wounded attempting to apprehend John Wilkes Booth. When Basil was only 3 years old, his family fled South Africa and returned to Britain after his father was accused of being a spy by the Boers. Rathbone had a very normal young adulthood, playing sports in school and taking on a job as an insurance clerk upon graduation to satisfy his father's desire that young Basil would have a conventional career. But in 1911, Rathbone's conventional career was derailed after he made his first appearance on stage as Hortensio in The Taming of the Shrew for his cousin Sir Frank Benson's theater company. He would then follow the company to the United States, appearing in their productions of Romeo and Juliet, The Merry Wives of Windsor, and As You Like It. He returned to Britain in 1914 and continued a career as a Shakespearean actor, but everything was put on hold in 1915 when he was called up into the British Army during World War I. After training with the London Scottish Regiment, he would be assigned as an intelligence officer and rise to the rank of captain, while also winning the title of British Army Fencing Champion, a skill he would use later in life to teach fencing to film swashbucklers Errol Flynn and Tyrone Power. Later in the war, Rathbone earned a reputation for fearlessness, volunteering for dangerous daylight recon missions. It wouldn't be until after his passing that letters would be found revealing that at that time he had been devastated by the news that his brother John had been killed in action, and the narrative of Rathbone's recklessness was re-examined as a possible consequence of an ensuing depression. But at the time these dangerous missions won Rathbone the Military Cross for conspicuous daring and resource on patrol. In 1919, Rathbone returned to the stage. He expanded into roles beyond Shakespeare, and by 1923, he had returned to the United States in a touring production of The Swan. He began acting in silent films, and in 1930, played Detective Philo Vance in The Bishop Murder Case. He rose quickly through the film industry, gaining a reputation for playing suave, sophisticated villains in costume dramas, and also as an athletic swordsman. In 1939, he appeared in Tower of London as Richard III, in one scene drowning a young Vincent Price in a keg of wine. Margaret Mitchell would also later claim that he had been her first choice for the role of Rhett Butler in the 1939 film adaptation of Gone with the Wind. But Mitchell also said at one point that she wanted the role to go to Groucho Marx, so her statements on the matter are considered a little bit suspect. In 1949, Rathbone's deep, rich voice would forever be enshrined in the minds of children as he narrated Disney's The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. Arguably, however, the greatest role of Rathbone's career started in 1939 when he appeared as Sherlock Holmes in Fox's The Hound of the Baskervilles. Reportedly, the role was Rathbone's from the very start of the pitch phase, as his name was the only one ever mentioned whenever somebody at the studio asked, "But who are we going to get to play Sherlock Holmes?" The film was a massive box office success, and Fox went on to produce a sequel later that same year. But by the next year, the studio had decided that Holmes was passé, and decided not to pursue any more productions about the character. Instead, the rights would be picked up by Universal Pictures, who would produce 12 feature films starring Rathbone as Holmes and Nigel Bruce as Watson, all filmed in the years between 1941 and 1944, and released between 1941 and 1947. While the Fox films had been set in Victorian England, Universal brought the character into the modern era and even featured Holmes foiling the plans of Nazi spies. Rathbone also reprised the role in The New Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, a radio series that began in 1939 and also co-starred Nigel Bruce. But by 1946, Rathbone feared that he had been typecast by the role. He left the radio show, turning his role over to Tom Conway, and also refused an option to renew a contract with MGM Studios, instead opting to return to Broadway and focus on his stage career until the Holmes heat had died down a little bit. Even so, he would later reprise the role for comedy sketches on television and in TV commercials, and starred in and produced a stage production of a play about Sherlock Holmes. Unfortunately, the show only ran for 3 performances, in part due to Rathbone suffering a severe bout of depression after his friend and longtime collaborator Nigel Bruce passed away suddenly from a heart attack while the play was still in rehearsal. The 1950s and 60s saw Rathbone frequently at work, although admittedly in lower prestige productions than he had previously fronted. He appeared as a panelist on the game show The Name's the Same, and appeared both in low-budget thrillers and in comedies, including 1966's The Ghost in the Invisible Bikini and 1967's Hillbillies in a Haunted House. He would also start recording spoken word albums for Caedmon Audio, including a popular reading of The Night Before Christmas, and a number of albums in which he appeared in dramatizations of Sherlock Holmes stories. He also toured successfully with his one-man show based on his autobiography, In and Out of Character. He would appear alongside his Tower of London castmates Vincent Price and Boris Karloff in Roger Corman's The Comedy of Terrors in 1963. Rathbone passed away suddenly in 1967. Today you can find his name on 3 stars of the Hollywood Walk of Fame, 1 for film, 1 for radio, and 1 for television.
Merry Christmas. Confound Merry Christmas. If I had my way, every fool who goes around with Merry Christmas on his lips would be boiled in his own pudding and buried with a stick of holly in his heart.
Uncle! Don't be angry, Uncle. Come, say you'll have dinner with us tomorrow. We're having turkey.
I'd rather dine on poisoned peacock with the Borgias.
From 1955 to 1957, Alcoa, the Aluminum Company of America, entered people's homes not just with their high-quality aluminum foil, but also with the Alcoa Hour. This series alternated with the Goodyear Theater and the Philco Television Playhouse, and brought live performances to the American people over the airwaves. They presented adaptations of novels and plays, but also the occasional original script and, on very big occasions, musicals. One such big occasion was December 23rd, 1956, when Alcoa Hour presented a new musical, The Stingiest Man in Town, starring Basil Rathbone as Ebenezer Scrooge, with his younger self played by Vic Damone, and narration provided by a group of carolers who were, in fact, 1950s vocal group The Four Lads. The book of the musical was written by Janice Renee Torrey, a Yale alumnus who is best known as part of a songwriting duo with composer Fred Spielman. The two would write music for All Shook Up with Elvis Presley, In the Good Old Summertime with Judy Garland, and they would also write the song Paper Roses, first made popular by Anita Bryant and later revived by Marie Osmond. Directing the production was Canadian-born Daniel Petrie, who had extensive experience directing for dramatic anthologies, having already handled episodes of the Revlon Mirror Theater, the Motorola Television Hour, the Elgin Hour, and Goodyear Playhouse. Petrie would later go on to direct A Raisin in the Sun, based on the play by Lorraine Hansberry and starring Sidney Poitier and Claudia McNeil, and 1988's Cocoon, The Return. The Stingiest Man in Town wound up being a major feather in Alcoa's cap. It was broadly watched, widely reported on, and a vinyl pressing of the soundtrack became a best-selling Christmas album. However, it was the 1950s, and networks by and large did not see the value in holding on to things like video of their well-reviewed live broadcasts. After all, what possible value could that have in the future? So following a purge of the network's archives, it was believed that the video of The Stingiest Man in Town had been lost forever. But the legacy of the special continued. The soundtrack entered new pressings, and in 1978, Rankin Bass would co-produce with Japanese company Topcraft an animated remake starring Walter Matthau as Scrooge, with his younger self voiced by Robert Morse. Basil Rathbone's performance, however, would not be seen again until 2011. It turns out that while the network had purged their copy of the special, an Alcoa executive had taken for himself a black and white kinescope of the broadcast, and it was later found among his effects. Today, you can find the Alcoa Hours production of The Stingiest Man in Town on DVD from Video Artists International.
Harry Hawkins, rag picker at your service.
Rag picker, eh? I bet you make a fine haul the day after Christmas.
Aye. Empty bottles, sir. Hundreds of them. Some of them ain't all empty.
You got all that enterprise. Salvaging trash, you're just the kind of man this country needs.
This version of Scrooge is an interesting take on the character. Basically, this is, what if Scrooge was the kind of person who said all the quiet parts out loud? He's not just grumpy about Christmas, he's specifically angry about it. He tells nephew Fred to his face that he hates the Christmas present Fred has brought him. When invited to dinner, he responds, "I'd rather dine on poisoned peacock with the Borgias." He is a truly crabby, disturbing old man. He screams at children and tries to get out of paying his cleaning lady before rushing her out the door as fast as he can, refusing her an advance on the next month's pay because, after all, she might be dead next month. I mean, this Scrooge has absolutely no filter of any kind, which makes his conversion at the end of the production all the more satisfying. The made-for-TV broadcast musical format also plays well with the story, as elder Scrooge gets to watch his younger self not only get dumped by Belle, but gets to see a literal wall being built between the two. We get to see Scrooge eating in his office, but it turns out his office is also his actual home, because of course it is. That makes it a lot easier to do the show live. There are a lot of ghosts swirling around as Marley warns Scrooge of what's to come, because, man, these modern dance troupes need the work. Of course, there's the obligatory 1950s TV nod to Jesus, as the Ghost of Christmas Present isn't accompanied by want and ignorance, but makes sure that Scrooge gets to hear his nephew Fred sing a hymn as the camera zooms in on the family's manger scene. We don't see Scrooge fall into the grave, but he does get thrown around and harassed by spooky spirits in the graveyard because, hey, we already had the modern dance troupe for the spirits in his bedroom, so why not? And Scrooge shows up at the Cratchits not just with a turkey, but with an armload of presents for all of the kids, none of which, from what I can see, are Alcoa products, so I guess letting your sponsor put their name in the title of the show means you don't have to be as worried about product placement. Maybe that's what we need in modern television. I mean, I'd watch the hell out of Apple Computer's science fiction Playhouse. Oh wait, that's called Foundation. So tell me, what do you think of Basil Rathbone as Ebenezer Scrooge in The Stingiest Man in Town? Are you Team Original Basil Rathbone? Or are you Team Animated Walter Matthau? Apparently, both shows do have their supporters. Drop down into the comments and let me know. While you're down there, there's a like button so that you can let me know that this video tickled your fancy. And there's also a subscribe button if you haven't subscribed already. That's a great way to get notifications, just in case you want to know when there's another video up on this channel. There's also a share button, so you can share this with people who love actors who have played Sherlock Holmes and Ebenezer Scrooge. Always remember that sharing is caring. Until next time, I am Glenn Williams, the film optimist, reminding you to watch like it means something. How am I supposed to operate my teleprompter and gloves? Come on.